coming. This presentation is HTTP botnets, and I'm going to leave you with in the good hands of Steve and Adair. So here you go.
All right, thank you. That's very trusting, good hands. Hopefully you guys aren't disappointed that it says on your sheet there that Andre Domino will be presenting. We were going to co-present, but he got called away from work, so I will be the sole presenter of this presentation. My name is Stephen Adair, and I am with the Shadow Server Foundation. I also have a day job. We're all volunteers, which you'll see in a second. So I do IT security work for the government. We'll talk about that later. That's not the point of this presentation or where any of this content comes from. If you're not familiar with Shadow Server, we're an all-volunteer organization in the process of actually becoming nonprofit. We have several members across the different countries. We're currently about 10 people who are really active. We have other people who are part of it, but since we all have our day jobs, it can vary from week to week, month to month, whether someone's just gone at complete AWOL. But there's a good core set of people who are there frequently and doing a lot of this research. Basically, we take a look at a darker side of the internet. We're looking at all kinds of botnets, all kinds of malware, spam, DDoS attacks, you name it, and we pretty much have some kind of eye on it or know someone who does or in some way involved in researching, monitoring, and reporting when we can. So basically our process flow for how we operate, we do a lot of capturing of malware. We have a very large malware repository. We have honeypots. We get different reports. We get malware from different partners, different organizations that provide us with samples. And we run those through one of our sandnets. We have several different sandnets, and they analyze the malware. Currently, we're using CW Sandbox, and we're also working on another method to also sandbox all the malware, get reports. So we take all that out. We extract the data. So, for example, IRC botnets, they come through. We see they connect to IRC. We automatically extract that data, and then we put out different snoops so we can emulate and monitor different IRC connections as if we were a bot. At the same time, we see the same things with HTTP. We monitor different ones of those, which I'll talk about later. And that allows us to get data about who they're attacking, what kind of malware they're spreading, who's connecting to it in many cases. And that's where it comes into the report area. This will be email reports that we give to various ASN owners, IP address owners, different organizations, law enforcement, and I'll show you a good list on another slide later, but that's where we go in, we take that data and we actually try and do something with it, not actually like hold it all close to us. And we don't sell any of our data, it's all provided for free. So kind of like what I described earlier, we have different honeypots, different methods that will bring in data. We have a SAN cluster, it's hundreds, literally hundreds of virtual machines with different VMware and other capabilities where we run our malware through all automatically. We also have capabilities to run stuff manually, so if it needs a little more attention, we can do that as well. And then obviously we all have our own personal machines, which we can do our own analysis on. A lot of times this malware spawns new malware, so you download something, it's actually a downloader, it goes out and grabs more. You're watching an IRC bot, they're telling you to go download something, they're putting links out there. That basically, you grab one source of malware and you might end up with 100 or 200 pieces depending on how busy and how talkative it is. At the same time, we log and report everything, so we know date timestamps when we grab malware, we know where we got it, we know where it's going, we know where it's attacking, or we're watching a lot of it and we're keeping track of all this data. And what we'd like to do with it is generate custom reports. So the report types you see there, DDoS, CNCs, pretty much anything that we can pull out that can be relevant to someone else, another organization. We'd like to provide that back to anyone that we can, anyone that needs it, as long as they're trustworthy and representative of the organization. We don't just send all of like the FBI or some other government organization's attacks to just a random person. You can filter by country, CIDR, country code, ASNs. So basically, if you're a CERT, we have a lot of CERTs on our list, they want everything that attacks their country. Several countries actually have CERTs, they can do quite a bit of stuff in there. They have a lot of oversight over the country, so if they see something going on in, for example, like Norway or the Netherlands, they have really good insight into the ISPs, and they can actually go and force them in many cases to take action. So we find a lot of the foreign countries that receive our reports can do a lot of really good stuff with it. At the same time, we have the emerging threats list, which was formerly bleeding threats. That's where the IRC list that a lot of people use. That's automatically produced from our ticketing system for IRC botnets. Right now, unfortunately, we don't have anything in terms of a blacklist for domains and other malware. That's kind of something you really have to have a lot of time to manage since things change so rapidly there. But we have a lot of people, law enforcement that we work with. We provide them what we can, international and local. Basically anyone who can use our data and if they want to go prosecute someone, investigate them, we try and get it to them. This is just a quick example. It's might not mean a lot to you. It's an example of a DDoS report. Shows the command and control server, the commands they issued, the channel they were in, where they were connected to. Same thing with the other malware reports. If you're hosting malware, we'll give you all the relevant information, the URL, domain names, etc. So jumping away from just shadow server and what we do, moving over to just botnets. Specifically, IRC was kind of like the bread and butter for a while, and a lot of people still think shadow server only deals with IRC. That might be because of the emerging threats list. Behind the scene, we do a lot that doesn't have to do with IRC. It's no longer the #1 command and control mechanism for bots. So a lot of people think IRC is declining. It's not declining too much. It's just that the other things are rising quite a bit. There's still hundreds, literally hundreds, if not thousands, of valid command and control IRC servers right now that are having anywhere from 1 bot on them to 10, 20,000, just very ranges. For the IRC, it's really easy for them to get into it. There's hundreds of versions. It's kind of easy to set up. It takes a little bit more skill and ability if they want to keep it up because they have to run an IRC server. They can use the public networks, for example, but public networks are a lot more responsive to shutting them down, for example, like Fnet or Verizon or any of the other ones, Undernet. Peer-to-peer botnets, on the other hand, they've come to the forefront. You hear about them here and there. We've seen some different custom ones. There's a few out there. They've been in the news a lot. The Stormworm, for example. That has and had a lot of machines on it, but it's still not really close to being the #1 command and control mechanism. And also, for someone to do that, it's really a custom job. There's not really a lot of kits or anything out there that you can go and set up a peer-to-peer botnet. You have to specifically program that and have more skill set. So here we are at the point of this talk, HTTP botnets. It's not IRC, it's not peer-to-peer. HTTP control botnets are back on top. They are the #1. They've been that way for a while. Pretty much we find dozens of new ones every week. It can vary from hundreds in some cases. It just depends on how much malware we get in. Generally, there's a centralized server. So kind of like IRC, where there's a centralized server, they have to phone in somewhere. So there's similarities. Bots have to go somewhere. You have to go and detect and get their commands or phone in or send their data in. A lot of times they either use dynamic DNS, so they'll use like dyndns.org. A lot of the ones from that is popular like in China and Asia is like the 3322.org, 8800.org, some of those real popular providers. But other HTTP botnets will also use the direct IP access. They'll just hack a server or they'll buy a server with a stolen credit card or whatever the case may be, and they'll just have it phone in directly to the IP address, which kind of gives you no doubt that they have control of the machine. In some cases, they've compromised a valid website. So kind of what are the benefits to it? It's really a low barrier of entry right now for people to set up an HTTP-based botnet. I'm hoping people in here don't just rush out and start setting one up now after getting this good information. But the kits are relatively easy to find. You can go out there in a few minutes and actually download a full kit with the builder. It's really easy to set up. All you need is a LAMP stack. That could be, in some cases, that's Perl. In other cases, that's PHP. Basically, you just untar your botnet, and you're good to go. And that pretty much, a lot of times there's other providers that provide PHP, and you'll find HTTP botnets on free web hosting providers. They don't always have to be a compromised system or something that they had purchased with stolen credit cards and whatnot. So another benefit to it is it looks like web traffic. It just phones in right over port 80, just like everything else. Port 80 is generally allowed out of most networks, so unless you're doing one of these options where you have like a gray list proxy or you have a white list only, you're probably not going to catch these, at least by default. It's also harder for intrusion detection systems to detect, so if there's no signature for it or you don't have it on a blacklist, same thing, you're not going to detect it, it's just going to go out. So there's different types and uses. Some of this was touched on in the last presentation, kind of what some of them use it for, different botnets. So a big one, a really big one actually, is the banker, info stealer, keylogger category. I can't stress how many there's several different ones, and people are bilking literally out tens of millions of dollars from different campaigns, different things they're doing, using various types. We're going to focus more on the distributed denial of service one, just because we can show you a little bit more on that. And the above one gets a little sticky, and there's a lot of different kinds, and I'll just tell you, it's a mess. They're also used as spam, and there's some others that do specialized things, like they might just do something really odd and specific, like connect to a website and send a certain message. And then there's the hybrid ones. They'll do banker and distributed denial service, a lot in spam, all those different things. And then the uses, what are they used for? It's pretty straightforward. To make money in most cases. That's what the motivation on a lot of these are. But others are show off, revenge, and the one that's not on there kind of, if you saw a lot of if you looked at the earlier presentation when they showed some of the SQL injection attacks, a lot of the ones, not Asprox or Danmec, but a lot of the ones that originate out of what appears to be China, the original tool that came out and started a lot of the SQL injection attacks. Oddly enough, a lot of their malware is very specific. They'll install it on a machine, and it will specifically look for a password to a very specific game. It's not there to steal everything. It's not a full keylogger. It will just go after a game that you may not have ever even heard of before its password. So they'll go through all this effort, SQL inject thousands and thousands of servers, infect the machines, and they're actually after a game you've never heard of's password, and that's it. So it's a little interesting. So a good case study that we're going to do here is the BlackEnergy DDoS bot, and we'll actually talk a little bit about this. Some things that they attacked, and we'll talk about some flaws with it, trying to give this a nice OWASP twist. So the BlackEnergy DDoS bot, if you're not familiar with it, is a web-based HTTP bot kit, and it's designed to attack websites, or actually you can attack IPs, but a lot of the main use that people use it for is the HTTP flooding. It's very popular in Russia and Ukraine, primarily Russian web space. A lot of the Russian web forums have it. You can go and search and find places where you can buy it for really cheap now. If you go search on RapidShare, you can actually download it. It's pretty easy to find, pretty easy to get, and it's pretty easy to set up. It has several attack capabilities: the send flutter, the UDP flooding, and the HTTP get flutter, which is the most, and then it has a combo flutter. In addition to that, it has update capabilities. So they've got it on the machine somehow. They've gone and SQL injected a site and infected it. They've hacked the site. They've mailed out a Trojan. For whatever reason, you have this on your machine. They can now update it with whatever else they want later on, and we'll get to why that can be a big deal. Here's an example of, for example, the post that a BlackEnergy bot does. So if you're an infected machine in your network, this is what the traffic might look like if you're doing a PCAP or you parsed it out. You'll basically see a post to whatever. Usually it's stat.php and a host name, and it will send an ID and a build ID. This is a unique ID. A unique ID is the machine name with some numbers after it, and then that build ID has to do with what the person set when they created the botnet. So it sends off a post with just that information, and it'll do this however often it's told to. In many cases, 10, 15 minutes. Every 15 minutes, it will pull into the server. And the server will respond with base64 encoded text, which decodes to a bunch of options that have to do with the settings are of how it should attack, what the frequency it should check in, and then what it should attack. So in this example, when we checked in May, it was attacking a Russian casino, another Russian website, a lot of things having to do with trading or traffic stuff. This is just one example. So that's the way it'll come back. So it's nothing that will jump out of you real large unless you have an IDS signature or you're really looking, or you really know your traffic on your network real well. So a good example is there's a BlackEnergy DDoS bot, just like the one you saw a minute ago. There's actually a series of them, 2 of them. I was in Vegas and I was actually just finished playing poker, and I sat down and I was looking at the sites that were being attacked from one of our monitors that we have, and it saw that it was attacking Full Tilt Poker at the time. It was also attacking several other gambling websites, many of which were completely down. And we watched it for a little while. It had varying effect on some really big websites. Either of them were taken down, others were just really slow, and some had no effect. So we looked back and saw what they'd been doing. They'd been attacking all kinds of gambling sites for probably over a week, several different ones. And some of them range from being attacked for just a few minutes, while others were being attacked for several days in a row, and they were literally keeping them offline. So we went to shut it down. So this is where some of the issues come in. So they were using a domain name. They had DNS. So they have a questionable registrar. It's probably one you guys may or may not be familiar, especially if you're following all the Trevo intercage stuff. You can guess who the registrar was. You can probably also do a who is. Actually, I didn't include the domain, so you can't. But yeah, it's one of those questionable registrars where you're not going to have a lot of luck trying to shut down the domain, even if you had a video of the person installing the Trojan itself. But the ISPs are sometimes pretty helpful. A lot of them don't want this stuff on their network, depending on where they go with their traffic. But unfortunately, a responsive ISP is a new ISP. So first ISP we went to, I believe this one was actually in the United States, shut it down pretty quickly. Within a few minutes to an hour, the person, after we noticed it was shut down, they were already up on a new IP address. And they weren't rotating IPs, they were going in and updating the A record, pointing it to a brand new server that they just set it up on. So we did this about at least 6 times in over 4 months, looking back at it now, that it completely kept changing and changing. I think he ended up in the Ukraine before it just magically went offline. I'm not sure why. But one of the problems is the bots, like I mentioned earlier, they can update themselves. So why is that an issue? Some organizations think, oh, I got malware on my machine, that's not a big deal, unless it's stealing passwords or wants my data. Maybe a DDoS botnet's not a big deal. You probably don't want to participate in taking someone else's website down. Maybe your organization doesn't mind that either, and it's still in your that's okay category. Well, the problem is these bots, what they did, for example, in this one, they updated the software to install yet another BlackEnergy botnet, so they kind of insulated themselves from their first domain and second domain being shut down and had yet more domains. But then they updated all of them with new malware. They updated them with a keylogger Trojan. So they put the Zeus, PRG Trojan, Z-Bot, it's got a lot of different names. A Trojan that's designed to steal all your credentials, your passwords, I think it will go after your P-store data, another thing. So you went from having a problem with just something that you think maybe is just an attacking botnet, maybe it's kind of mundane to you and your network and it's not a big concern, to something that's actually stealing whatever it can, all from the same infection. And they can go ahead and install and update with whatever they want. You imagine it, they can put it on there. And in many cases, they have and do. So this is an example. So some people say, why bother shutting them down? They just move. Well, I mean, that in many cases that does buy some time, and sometimes they also make mistakes. For example, this was the one of the botnets that we forced to move. That was doing the gambling attack. They left their admin panel when they recreated it without a password. So it's when you went to the website, this is exactly what it showed you. You didn't have to guess or log in or anything. So at that time, when they had just gotten back up, they had about 1,458 bots online. So it's a decent size. It's not in the upper realm or upper echelon of botnet sizes, but when you have that many pounding away at a web server, unless you're specifically set to handle that, you're probably going to go down pretty quick. Not to mention, this was when it was first rebuilding and probably was close to 4,000 or 5,000. So normally we don't necessarily reveal flaws, but given that it's OWASP and the community, we thought we might share this interesting one. This is right out of the BlackEnergy 1.8, one of the later models, the code. I'm not going to make you stare at the screen for a long time to find out what the problem is, but there is a little flaw in here. If you see the little variable log end, I guess that's supposed to be logged in, not the best English in the world. Basically, it sets that valuable to whatever is in your cookie, and only if the cookie matches the password, it will set login to true. Well, you can just start off and set a cookie and have the value equal true, which pretty much bypasses the whole authentication mechanism to the botnet. So this is a copy of just this on my own server. Notice the 192.168 address. This is what the login. It's not very exciting or fancy. This is add and edit cookies. Just create a cookie named logged in. Content is true. The IP in the path. And then I'm logged in without ever having to authenticate. And obviously I don't have any bots online. It's a good thing. So there are a few other interesting things of bad coding. A lot of people say add slashes is a good thing to use, but there's been a lot of talk. I haven't actually tested it, that there's ways with GBK code set to actually try and bypass it. I don't know if that can be done here. The other thing is there's other than that, they don't really sanitize what goes into the build ID, and that's displayed back in the admin panel. So if you go back, you can't see it down on the bottom where it says build 0. It would display the build ID of whatever was submitted. So got an issue there for possible cross-site scripting or other things that you can do with that. So people could potentially use that to infect the bot herder, find it as IP address, do any number of interesting things. I wouldn't recommend it though, but just putting it out there. You get into legality issues and don't do it. HP botnet monitoring. So how are we monitoring them? That might be something of interest. So what we do is obviously we have to start off with knowing what to monitor and where to look. So that obviously comes from our SAN netting capabilities. We capture malware. We find out where all the web-based botnets are. Right now, we don't have a lot of things to necessarily automatically tell us what it is. It'd be nice if we hooked it up to emerging threats and ran all of our SANnet through that, and we could flag them or something. But we don't do that right now. We have our malware reports that we get, and we can just look through those. And usually, for example, the PRG Trojan usually calls for something.bin, like cfg.bin. You'll see a post request. You can kind of look through those, use stat.php. We probably have a BlackEnergy, and we can look at those pretty quick and add those to our monitoring. We also get data sharing from different partners. They'll tell us there's a botnet here or there that we might have missed or something that we don't know about, and we can add that to our monitor. So the next step is to emulate the bot. So this is kind of just a Perl script. It's relatively simple that we run. We have a configuration file which takes parameters into it, where the botnet is, what commands it should send, and it has a setting for how frequently we'll do it. And we'll periodically pull the CNC server for the command. So for example, the BlackEnergy, we'll report in with a machine name, the correct build ID, and we'll do that like every 20, 30 minutes, and we'll get back the base 64 commands and decode those. And we can see if it's sitting there idle, if it's telling it to download, or if it's telling it to attack something. Telling it to attack something, we'll see. We'll get it. It'll be output in one of our channels. It'll also go into our database. And if it's tagging someone that is on our list for the ASNs, they'll get a report that they've been attacked. So at least they know the source of it. At the same time, if it tells it to go and download some new malware, we automatically grab that, sandbox that, and the process repeats itself. So it's also kind of similar to the way we monitor IRC stuff. We have an IRC Snoop tool. It kind of emulates an IRC client. It sits there and acts like a bot. Kind of similar to that, except for IRC is a little different in that you can kind of just sit there due to the protocol, whereas HTTP you have to continually pull in and get updates. So yeah, of course, we log and report all that as well. Since we just added this in recently, we did a presentation I put together related to the Georgian DDoS attacks. This actually fits in pretty well to a lot of the stuff here. We observed our first attacks on the Georgian president's website. I know it's Mikhail. I don't want to try and pronounce his last name. Someone can shout it out if you want. I don't want to butcher it. On July 19th, we started seeing a lot of attacks against his website from a mockbot controller. We saw ICMP floods, SYN floods, HTTP floods. It was doing everything that it could, firing at it. We checked the website. It was down, extremely sluggish, down. It basically took the website down over the entire weekend. I believe the 19th was a Friday. The attacks were issued by a mockbot controller, which is yet another DDoS botnet. It's one that's written in Perl, and it's one that not a lot of information is about. We actually have a copy of it, but we haven't really looked into it too deep just for a lack of time. But we do know that this particular botnet had over 15,000 bots in it. So if 1,000 can often bring down a decently sized website, 1,500 is going to definitely pound it into submission, which it did. The mockbot controller happened to be at that domain. We had previously never seen it attack anything else before. This was the first attack we'd ever seen it do. It was just sitting there idle the entire time. Those are the exact commands that it issued as we parsed it. To flood the website, it added win love in Russia, spelled incorrectly. The TCP flood, and then did ICMP flood. I believe the thing supports UDP, but it wasn't doing it. So this one is obviously an HTTP-based botnet, and that's what they were doing. All these bots are phoning in, getting their command. We had run it through our malware repository sometime in, I believe, June or late May, so it hadn't done anything for over a month. And we were just sitting there pulling in, and one day it decided to start issuing an attack, seemingly out of the blue. We really never got a good explanation from it. This was about the time some of the Georgian stuff was starting to bubble up a little bit more. I don't know all the history and everything that goes on there, but I did see some people had different Strat4 reports and different things that tried to find some reasoning behind it. The first controller was located in the United States, so this is where it was originally located. So we actually were able to get a hold of that provider and get it taken down pretty quickly, and they were pretty responsive. And what was nice about it is they were responsive, and they actually never came back. I have no idea why. They took it down, and it was never seen again, which is kind of rare in this. Now continuing, about a little over, I guess, a month later. No, not quite a month later, less than a month later. This is when the Russian-Georgian conflict really escalated into actual fighting. You saw it on the news. But on the same day, that's when the web attacks against Georgia started. The websites were attacked, DDoSed. They were suddenly being attacked by citizens. They were being defaced. They were being attacked from several different fronts that all coincided with the same day the military action did, which was fairly interesting and still is. The .ge websites became heavily targeted. So this is a posting actually from one of the Russian hacking forums, Anti-Chat. This is a long list and goes on for several pages of different postings of people replying. This is on August 8th, where they posted SQL injection issues with several of the websites. So you see there's a .gov on there. There's different Georgian websites. There's several more .govs, which actually were defaced soon after as a direct result of people finding these different SQL injections. I believe the police website, the president website, several websites pretty much came under attack. And they would continue looking for other vulnerabilities. One they posted a different a login bypass. Some of them they pasted the passwords to the admin panels. They were pretty much going after anything they could. They hadn't really posted a lot of Georgian stuff beforehand. It seemed the activity kind of inspired people to go searching for stuff they were already capable of finding before. During this time frame, the websites of the president and parliament were both hacked and defaced. They were defaced, and I believe both of them servers were actually complete root compromises. I know at least one of those had a complete root compromise. I don't know if that came as a result of a web-based injection or not, but I do know that. Nice. Well, maybe if they're trying to hit me, that was a horrible job. But each day, and then each day thereafter, the forum had several new vulnerabilities publicly posted about different Georgian websites. I mean, if you go through, it's literally like dozens and dozens and dozens. And what we did is we tried to work with the Georgian CERT, which they don't really have a real national CERT. I think they're working on it. Grina, one of their educational institutes there, is working to kind of coordinate and act in that manner. So we passed on everything we could to them. But you'll see that some of the attacks they could help with and others they couldn't. So on that same day, 888, the botnets started DDoSing Georgian government sites and news sites and a bunch of others that were sympathetic to the cause. So they were attacking like press websites in Russia that were writing pro-Georgian stories. They were attacking, it wasn't all just government websites, and it wasn't all just .ge websites. Some of them were .com, different news, a lot of news people that were attacked. We observed at least 6 different BlackEnergy botnets attacking over that period of time. They didn't all start on August 8th, but over between August 8th and the 12th or so, at least these 6 we saw in part of the attacks. And these are the websites that were primarily targeted. These are ones that we saw directly out of, this is from our own logging that we witnessed attacks being issued for. So you see the news, a lot of the news websites, things having to do with Georgia, like the Capitol down there. And some others, I don't know if like the Kasparov website had been hacked before, or attacked before rather. Gary Kasparov, his site was attacked during the same time frame. So a lot of people, these are reversed. So it's not the Russian government, the flow data, it's kind of told a different story about a lot of people thought it was just botnet traffic only. So we had actually been given access to flow data to one of the .gov websites, .gov.ge websites. And the botnets kind of basically stopped around August 12th. There were some that continued on, but the DDoS attacks were still coming in. So we were looking at this on the 13th. And what we saw is that the traffic was relatively heavy, but it wasn't TCP traffic, it was ICMP traffic. So if all the incoming traffic is also ICMP, and it's all coming from Russia. Majority of it was coming from Russian IPs, so it was dial-up modems, it was broadband connections, it was all different various Russian hosts. So people that kind of give the credence to the government being involved, unless all the officials took the day off and were using their home machines to organize this, it was kind of looking a little bit like it might be something we've heard of before. Kind of the thing in Estonia where Russians, kind of a lot of Russian forums, different citizens, it's not all just Russians, probably just anyone who wants to be called to arms, but this is where the average citizen got involved, and we're starting to think this might be happening here. A lot of people wanted to believe the Russian government was behind everything. You can't say definitively that they weren't, but we're definitely not saying that they were, and we're kind of leaning towards that they weren't necessarily behind it. So we did a quick Google search, kind of a simple search there, just search ping plus gov.ge, because we know when they attacked Estonia, what were they doing? They wrote a batch file, and they just basically just sent ping requests, and they told everybody to run it nonstop and attack Estonian websites. Well, what did we find? We found several blogs that had ping commands attacking a lot of different websites, majority of them Georgian news sites, Georgian government sites, and some others that are related. So those are being sent around and posted on forums, posted on personal websites. Everyone's asking other people to come call to arms, to download these scripts and run it at certain times or run it all the time. So it's really looking very, very similar to how Estonia was attacked. So we have these batch files that they encourage people to run. So on August 13th, that's when we first found it, and a lot of these posts, or at least a few of them, dated back to August 8th. So this wasn't a post. They caught on, they heard about the attacks, and they added in later. This coincides right with the botnet attacks. So it looks like grassroots activism, like the ones we're seeing in Estonia, were being done on the same day, which also kind of pulls away from the fact that a lot of people are saying, oh, maybe the government was behind it, and then the citizens just jumped in later. It doesn't look so much like that. At least that's not what the data supports. So like we said, most of the BlackEnergy botnets that we observed, they weren't even just attacking Georgian websites. They had attacked like several different websites along the way. So people were kind of saying, oh, these botnets, if they're controlled by the government, it may or may not look like someone, like they might have attacked other things they might be concerned with. So we went back and looked through the history of what these other botnets had been attacking. So this is an example list of some of the other websites that different DDoS attacks had gone for from some of the botnets. They're attacking banking websites, escort websites, gaming websites, credit card hacking sites, a lot of different ones. So it doesn't really fit in the groove of attacking only government websites or only Georgian websites or things along those nature. So since I still have some time left, I actually wanted to talk about two other projects I didn't put in here that Shadow Server is doing. I don't have slides for them. I was just going to see how quickly I could roll through this and talk about it. I didn't know if I'd have time. The first one is we're doing a project which is a sinkhole server. So if you think about some of those SQL injection attacks we saw earlier, we saw a lot of this stuff where they're injecting different domains and they point back to malicious JavaScript. But one thing we think about is, well, what happens to those domains that they injected, or what happens to those domains involved with malware when they either expire off, they die off? Well, they still exist, and there's still websites that are hacked and compromised. There's still machines that are botted and compromised. So a recent project we worked up is we have a sinkhole server that emulates both IRC and HTTP traffic. And what it does is it runs on every port above, I think every port but port 25, because we also emulate a mail server with a separate application. And what it does is it'll accept incoming connections, and if they do a web request, it will respond with a web response, and if they send an IRC request, it will emulate an IRC server. So what this allows us to take some of those malicious domains. For example, we have a couple of the ones from some of the SQL injection attacks that happened recently. We register those. We can see the incoming traffic. We grab all the information. We grab the refers. We grab who came in. So in the example of the SQL injection attacks, I mean, in many of these you can go and Google and find where they're at. But we can see which sites are actually still infected and which pages they're at, because we'll get hits on our website from someone visiting like a shareware website we're getting a lot of hits from. It's a very popular website that was SQL injection. It looks like they only hit their request password field page, or they missed that page, because we keep getting all these refers from that page. So we're also doing this with malicious domains where, like, for example, the BlackEnergy stuff or the people who are stealing credentials, we're registering those domains. So this kind of is an interesting project. We're still in like the preliminary stages. It helps twofold. One, if you register it, the bad guys can't, so we don't have to worry about them going back and kind of reverting to their old ways, which they could easily do. And the second one is it allows us to continue our research into who's infected, gives us a real count of who's infected, and it allows us to report back out this data to let people know, hey, machines in your organization are affected. So if we see, example, a government institution or some other country, they have someone who's trying to phone in and send off keylog data, well, we record all that information, we're able to report it back to them. And right now we're trying to find different ways that get more servers involved and get more people to participate with different domains they might be able to help out with. It's a fairly interesting project, and it's still in its early phases. It's definitely one that's worth looking at. So, other than that, I thank you for listening. You're welcome to, if we have time for questions, you can ask me now or grab me later, or feel free to shoot me an email. Thank you. So questions?
Was there any demographic information for the zombies that were involved in the Georgia incident?
All right, is this thing on?
Yeah,
Hello?
it's on.
You hear me? All right. On the Georgian ones, for those, we don't have that information. We actually didn't use our little the little exploit I showed you, we didn't go and use it and log in, although I guess we easily could have. So we don't really know. From what we've seen, the one page is kind of a good. It may not be a good indicator of these, but it kind of ran the. Oops, sorry. I'm gonna go back a little further. Like on this one, you see on here, their top 2 sets are unknown in India, and that was one that was based out of. It moved to Ukraine and stuff later. It's one that's popular with Russia. It seems to really vary. It might just depend on where they've compromised the server and who they can heavily target with their traffic. Other questions? I think it's
Just thinking historically on this, going back to Solidarity, which was, I don't know if you were alive back then, but
So it's okay that I don't know what you're talking about exactly?
Well, no, but I mean when the wall was coming down and when the polls were Solidarity movement, they found that by using the computer networks in the universities, they couldn't be shut down. They could keep communicating. They could keep command and control running for what we would have thought was a good organization. So now you're seeing Estonia and then you're seeing Georgia. What's the assessment of the impact that the Georgia attack had on Georgia or any of those organizations in Georgia being able to do their business, do their command and control? And does this have any forward-looking thoughts for us, industry, whatever? Are we seeing something weaponized that might be then turned against a business? I know the story is a lot of these gambling sites at some point have to pay to not get a DDoS. So what's your thoughts about Georgia?
So Georgia, I don't know exactly. I know that I've heard some people from Georgia speak on that. So it's a website. It's more, in some cases, more, I would say, of an kind of an embarrassment than it is like. I mean, how often do you go to whitehouse.gov and get your information on a daily basis that would cripple you if you didn't have it? It might be similar along those lines. It's more of an embarrassment. Obviously, people want their websites to be up, and there are people who go to it and use that information. They can't get to it. But I'd say it's probably more at least in the Georgian case, I don't think it was as critical to them doing their day-to-day operations. Whereas I think, don't quote me on that, but in Estonia, I think it had a little bit more of an effect, but some of the same thing. I think varying depending on what went down and what wasn't. And then, of course, with the gambling attacks, we see them hitting a lot of them. We suspect extortion may or may not be part of the theme behind it. Why do you go and attack several different gambling websites for days on end? Several different ones, like as in like hundreds in some cases, unless you're trying some extortion attempt. They also hit other different businesses. So that seems to be a motive. We haven't been able to get anyone to say, yes, we were extorted. But it definitely is an economic loss, a realizable number to several of those organizations that were down for hours or days, where they can't take people to sign up, they can't take deposits. So in several of those cases, they lost a substantial amount of money.
Any other questions? Great, so that was excellent. Couple of quick announcements before everybody kind of leaves the room. Lunch is going to be served, box lunch. I think you got to line up in the vendor area. You'll see they're kind of against the wall over there. And that box lunch is not served until 12, so you have a few minutes. You can also go out and get your own lunch because there's no actual talk between 12 and 1 to give you time for lunch, so it's up to you. In addition to that, I think Capture the Flag, if you guys are interested in that live hacking competition, the registration is going to happen right up on the mezzanine here. So look for the registration there. And in addition to that, I just wanted to mention that everybody in their bag has a blue ball. And that blue ball is to be used to throw at a speaker if you feel that their content is irrelevant or something, they're not a good speaker, you don't like them. That's really what the ball is used for. So,
or a commercial spin, because all of the vendors' talks are supposed to be vendor neutral. They're called bullshit balls. Feel free to throw them at friends and speakers.
I just let you know my feelings weren't hurt in any way.
So, yeah, exactly. No, that was a great talk. But okay, so we'll see you guys in about an hour or so, and enjoy your lunch.